I like that.
I like it too. I am thrilled to be back on stage with Dr. Ruth. So I know that you have been on this whirlwind tour, going with this film to first the Sundance Film Festival. We were together at the Jerusalem Film Festival and many other cities and countries. And I'm wondering, because you've been on the road for at least 8 months, I suspect, what have been the high points of being with the film as opposed to merely going to speaking engagements?
So first of all, the high point is with you. Because let's face it, to have a friend like you, and I admire you, and they have to know that, and I come to your films, so that's one thing. On the other hand, it's very, very rewarding. That's why I have seen it now so many times, but I never miss seeing it, especially on a big screen. It's very different than to see it on a small screen. And actually, Annette, I find something new every single time because I pay attention and I somehow find something new. For example, something new that you don't know. I told Ryan White, the film producer, the other day I said, I really compliment you for not taking out when I said to him 3 times in the film, what a stupid question. He could have easily taken it out. And his answer was, well, I don't have an ego like that. But it was very interesting because he could have, in editing, I had nothing to do with the editing, he could have taken that out. And the other thing that I realized, and that's important for the 92nd Street Y and your program, how it was not intentional, but how wonderful that Ryan is not Jewish. Because we filmed many more things that are not in the film, like a Sefer Torah in Washington Heights that I donated in memory of Freddie, like some of the songs from Frankfurt am Main, like many other Jewish aspects. And it would have made a Jewish film. And this way, because of Ryan being gay, because of him being not so young that he doesn't remember the AIDS crisis, the film is really much richer. And I learn something new every single time.
You know, I think you're absolutely right, because though I think of this film as a portrait of Dr. Ruth with a comprehensive sense of how that past has informed your present and how much you give to the future, it really is a chronicle of our times. For example, from the 1980s through this moment, because you get a feeling of the historical significance, not just of you, but of the discussion about sexuality, about AIDS, Planned Parenthood from past to present. I think you're quite right that his focus is expansive and aimed at a contemporary audience, many of whom are not either are not familiar with or don't remember the 1980s. And I'm lucky enough, old enough, that I do. And I remember how shocking. My father was shocked when he first heard you on the radio. He was embarrassed because he had never heard, forget about a woman, but he had never heard anybody talking frankly about sex, and it embarrassed him. My mother, less so. Well, you came to know my mother quite well.
But very interesting. The other aspect that every time I learn something new is, and this time it hit me again, that the animation, I was very worried. I did not see it before I saw the whole film with Rafi, the producer, and Ryan in my living room. I was worried that they would make me look like Pinocchio or like Mickey Mouse. And what they did, it's an Israeli film, an Israeli designer who does the animation, is just brilliant. Because when you see the Frankfurt railroad station, that was not true. There was not just my mother and my grandmother at the railroad station. There were all the other mothers and grandmothers waving goodbye. And what is brilliant in that scene is the aspect that I'm so concerned about, and I talk a lot about that, is loneliness. You can feel, and also with the color, you can feel the loneliness of this mother and grandmother, and you can feel in my face actually the struggle of not crying and at the same time trying to make the other children then sing. So this was something. And the other aspect is, here is something brand new. I have a surprise for Annette. So this book, Roller Coaster Grammar, because on the second part I'm talking about taking 2 of my 4 grandchildren to an amusement park. We get measured. They can go on the ride and I'm too short. So as we speak, this book is going to schools, junior high schools. Look at your face,
That's
I like
fantastic.
that. No, the Shoah Foundation, Steven Spielberg, has been taking them. They are going to all of the schools for age appropriate, because I don't talk about the horror of Auschwitz, but I talk about World War II and having been an orphan of the Holocaust. And guess what? As of today, Annette, as of today, there will be a film taking the animation from the film, adding 10 more minutes. So the film will go with the book to schools in Canada and United States.
Wow.
I'm happy. I'm really happy. Children like to see children in a movie. So that's, as of today, that's the newest.
That is fantastic. I mean, I've had the great pleasure of actually reading Roller Coaster Grandma, and I think one of my favorite parts is you write, I'm short, but I always find opportunities to stand tall. You understand that I respond to that even more than most people do.
But you are taller than me.
Slightly.
Not much, but taller.
Right.
Was your mother taller than you?
Yes. Oh, my mother was quite normal. You know, I'm at best diminutive, and as well, we should.
I knew her, but I didn't remember.
No, yeah. Well, as she got older, like all of us, you lose kind of an inch, and then you lose another inch, and if you make it.
No, I can't lose. They won't see me anymore. They will only hear me. I want to tell you one other thing, that the book with the film permits to give a lesson in history, because in the fall of 1938, before the night of broken glass, there was a conference in Evian, and the conference was called to save German Jews. Roosevelt sent an emissary and many other countries. The conference failed miserably. The only thing that came out of that conference is a cry, at least let's take the children, so that the parents might be able to get their visas or any country that would accept them. And if I had been, so England took 10,000 Jewish children, Holland, Belgium, and France, 300 each, Switzerland, 300 each. Annette, if I had been Holland, Belgium, or France, I would not be alive. So I was on the group to Switzerland. It has many reasons. It was an Orthodox Jewish group. The ones to England, the children sometimes went to non-Orthodox Jewish and sometimes to non-Jewish, which no problem with me. And so that's an interesting lesson that we have to learn. And I have to say one more thing. As you saw in the film, that I don't talk about politics, and many of my friends here know that, and Patty Kenner knows that, because she's very involved in politics. These days, I have changed my mind. There are 3 things that I do talk about. One is when I see children being separated from their parents at the border, I'm very sad. Number 2 is the issue of abortion, which I made it clear there. And number 3, that in this rich, wonderful country of ours, that there's not enough funding for Planned Parenthood. So these 3 things I do talk about.
And they are so continuous with the life that we get to know of yours through this film. How much of you has been shaped by being isolated, by being forced to separate from parents, and by learning the value of fighting for an education. So many of us, we take for granted. We go to school, we get a good education, we don't think about it. And one appreciates when you go to see your first boyfriend. I love that scene. When you recollect, how you would have to learn from him because girls weren't supposed to be educated.
And that did not permit us to be in high school.
That's right.
Very interesting. I did a longitudinal study about those children who went with me to the orphanage in Switzerland, 50, for my master's essay. Interesting. None of these children, none fell by the wayside. None committed suicide. None became clinically depressed. None really did not make it. Nobody else became Dr. Ruth. But none fell by the wayside, and the reason for that is that in sociology, the early socialization, the early years of these children, I was 10 and a half, the youngest was 6 and a half. The early years of their childhood were in a loving family. They were, before the night of broken glass, they were in a family that thought that they would live out their lives like other families. And this early socialization was crucial. And that's what we have to teach young people, that how important it is that there has to be that kind of family life, that kind of love.
One thing that I watched it today for the third time, and I was more aware of how you at that home, even though you were 13, were taking on parenting roles. It actually started in the train when you realized that these children were so sad and you started singing, and then others joined.
With my awful voice, but true.
Yes, but what I'm wondering about, because I know that you teach, for example, at Columbia University, Teachers College, at Hunter College, and your courses revolve around the family, representations of the family in media, in culture. And I'm wondering if these days, it isn't more about sort of re-parenting. In other words, we can no longer assume that the family means in 2019 all that the family might have meant in 1938. It has gone through various permutations. And it's almost like repairing is a great word here, that parenting, from what I'm hearing of you speaking in the film, it's not just new pairs, repairing parents, whether they're of the same sex or whatever. It's also to somehow, tikkun olam, to repair broken strands in childhood so that children and parents can grow together outside of categories that have been imposed in the past. I mean, is that something that concerns you still now?
Absolutely. And not only that, in the book, Sex for Dummies, I talk a lot about my concern about two things, about the art of conversation getting lost and the issue of the loneliness. The art of conversation, families, you go to a restaurant and you see each one on their iPhone. I'm not against iPhone, we all have it, we have to have it, but there is something that we have to be very careful, that this art of conversation is getting lost. Not with you. After each film that I watch, your other films, not just mine, that you have that, you are really gifted in that. But the art of conversation, we should not take for granted. We have to say it has to be cultivated, and it has to be cherished, and it has to be protected.
I know. I mean, I personally am so grateful for email because it allows me to take care of, say, 20 communications within 1 hour. If I had to actually talk to people on the phone or in person, I could never do it. But I am aware at the end of the day or at the end of the year that it has become all too easy to avoid seeing anyone but a few people that I feel I must or want to see. And you have made, I think, a lot of younger people aware that to be more comfortable about your sexuality is one thing, but if it's going to lead only to transient provisional hookups, that's not going to make people any happier. And that there needs to be, if I'm understanding you these days correctly, the combined appreciation of the embodied being, what your body can do that is pleasurable and accessible to others. but also what you can give verbally, face to face, so that you get to know the whole person.
And this joie de vivre, this zest for life, that if you are fortunate, Mark, listen carefully, if you are fortunate to have somebody who is home smiling when you get home, because there is another person, and to cultivate that. And we have to do some more talking and some more teaching about that.
You're right, and obviously, she's referring to my husband, who she invites to be a guest speaker in her class at
Every time,
University
every
all the
semester.
time. And I thank God every day that I met Mark. I know how precious that is.
I want to say two more things. In this book, I did not talk about Auschwitz.
Right.
Here, I did show about how horrible it is not to have a grave. I'm on the board of the museum. Jeff Tabak is here, Patty is here on the board. And the question when the Auschwitz exhibit was debated, there were some people who said no, because it's so terribly expensive. And I played a card, which I very rarely do, but I did. I said, this is like a graveyard for my parents who don't have graves. And then those people who were a little bit sitting on the fence voted for it. So now I want everybody to go to the Museum of Jewish Heritage twice. Once you'll be upset, and second time I learned some aspect of the rise of Nazism and of Hitler that I did not know. I'm going to be tomorrow at a conference at the Javits Center on anti-Semitism with the head of the Shoah Foundation, the director, not Steven Spielberg, but the director. So we will talk about that, of how we have to stand up to be counted. Even 4'7", I lost half an inch, to be standing up. So while they are right, as a Jecke, as a German Jew, I don't cry in public, that's true, but I do these days feel the obligation to speak up.
Absolutely. Yeah. And by the way, the phrase that they've used for the Auschwitz exhibit at the Museum of Jewish Heritage, not so long ago, not so far away.
Right.
It has become, I'm hearing people quoting that these days, and it's been extended, the exhibit, into January.
Yeah. It will be longer even.
Even longer, okay.
I don't know that, but I'm saying it.
Whatever you say, people tend to move it forward. You see that in the film. But what you're talking about is two different aspects of what I think you're about and what this culture needs. On the one hand, a serious exhibit like the one at the Museum of Jewish Heritage, which is historically rich and personally devastating, but the awareness that there's a whole group of younger people. I mean, we both keep teaching, we get older and our students keep getting younger somehow. And this is the kind of introduction that is relatively painless to create awareness that there was something, and it wasn't that far away or that long ago that their grandparents may have known about, but they are kind of ignorant of. And the very idea of a roller coaster grandma is an effective tool. And I believe personally, I never teach animation, I teach, history of fiction film, but it's true what you said, that very often in a motion picture, the most effective way to convey something that is true, in quotes, is not necessarily that it be real. My students have been increasingly discussing the slippage between reality and truth, because if you show something that's a photograph, it's ostensibly real, but it may not be the full truth. If you show an animated image of a little girl fighting back her tears, it's not real, but it has emotional truth. And if a director as good as Ryan White is able to somehow juxtapose, balance elements of direct documentary by using archival footage or interview, animation, then he creates something that isn't just a good portrait of you, but it's a real movie that can have an effect on others. And just for the record, The director is Ryan White, and the producer is Rafi Marmor. You had mentioned both of them before. At the beginning of the movie, you actually say, the crew is here, don't let Ryan into the bedroom. Nobody goes into the bedroom. And it raises the question, did you at any point say, I don't want to talk about this, I don't want you to look at that? In other words, did they give you the right to pre-select what you would reveal? Or did they just work and you would occasionally say, I don't want to go there? Because it seems like you're being totally honest and comfortable with the camera.
I was honest with the camera, but I was super careful. So I did not, when I said in the bedroom, that had nothing to do with sex.
Right.
Ryan is not interested in women, and it's okay to say it. However, it has something to do with, fortunately, the housekeeper Sturka knows. When I have people coming, take all of my junk and put it in the bedroom on the bed. So it had to do with a disorder in the bedroom and not really with sex. But because it's Dr. Ruth, it comes out funny. So
it's a good moment in the film. It works for me.
And so I'm very pleased with the film, because it really speaks, and I think that it does make a contribution in terms of talking about anti-Semitism, which these days we all have to talk about, and about something to stand up and to be counted.
Yes. Now, at the time that you started Sexually Speaking, way back in the early 80s, 81, you can tell from the film what an impact that program had on audiences at the time when sex was taboo. What I'm curious about is, do you feel that the conversation has changed very much since the 1980s? When people ask you either on the street, in person, or in official settings, are the questions different?
Very good question. What is different is I get less questions about, for example, premature ejaculation. I get less questions about women not having an orgasm. And that has to do, I'm not the only sex educator, that has to do that our society and television and films have been more explicit. There was a film about sex after 50. It showed clearly how they should pleasure each other. So there are questions that I get less of them. But there are other questions about loneliness that I get more. Somehow this culture of ours right now is promoting more of this loneliness, promoting more of this what to do with your life than before. Maybe before it was more clear what you were getting married, you had children, and there was more of a set in society. So I do get less of those questions. But there are still enough questions for young people to become not just sex therapists, but sex educators. There is another thing in the film that is very important for me to say to you, that there is the woman who said she regretted that she had an abortion. That was not a real woman. I never used real people. I don't do reality television. That was an actress that John Lollos, who came from the theater world, assigned. I never knew what she would bring to me, because in my office I didn't know what problem is being brought. She was an actress who portrayed a woman who had had an abortion and regrets it. After the film, after the little segment in my office is finished, I can tell her, you played that beautifully. You did that wonderful, she got paid, and I could sleep at night. Now, Ryan doesn't want me to talk about that so much, because he then says, so maybe other things in the film are not real. Not so, the other things in the film are real. The only thing that's not real is that this woman is an actress.
But you're raising such an important question, which actually I raised 2 weeks ago in my class at Columbia when I was teaching Kieślowski's work, because I simply mentioned to my students that this great Polish director started out as a documentary filmmaker before he made these famous fiction films like The Double Life of Veronique and Three Colors, Blue, White, Red. why did he leave documentary? He said because he came to a point where he was afraid that he was, whether he wanted to or not, exploiting somehow the pain, the drama of other people by merely putting the camera in front of them. And he finally said something like, I would rather go to the pharmacy and buy glycerin drops to put on an actor's face than to film somebody who cries in front of my camera.
Fascinating.
And I actually find that remarkable because he had both a conscience and then the ability to become a poet of crafted images.
Fascinating.
But it sounds to me like a similar thing, that there is, for you and I think for him, there was a sense of responsibility, that if you're taking the lives of real people who are opening themselves up to you, it can be, it's almost more than a therapist on TV should be allowed or a documentary filmmaker should be allowed to exploit. I mean,
very true. In a documentary I did in the former Soviet Union about older people, when I see that the filmmaker, Sasha, actually made a woman cry at a cemetery, I don't like it. I was not there when they did that. I raised the money and I did some stand-up and I wanted the film to be shown, but I don't like that. I don't like to see the woman cry at the cemetery of her husband. Because I said, I once did ask, how did you make her cry? He said, it's secret. So I don't know how, but they're very interesting to discuss.
Yeah, I to this day, I'm not sure that there is a correct or non-correct answer because each filmmaker, whether documentary or fiction, finds the balance between crafting something aesthetically rich and a moral imperative to not exploit lives, even sometimes lives of actors.
Right.
So it's a delicate balance that has to be, I think, renegotiated all the time.
So it's very interesting to see how Ryan dealt, for example, because he's gay and he had friends who died of AIDS, and when they showed those pictures that were public pictures, I don't know where he even got them, but they're very effective.
Yes.
And we have to say again, in today's world, that I do teach and I say that we have to be worrying about sexually transmitted diseases because people hop into bed so much faster without knowing each other. And that's when I said here that in Hebrew, the word for knowledge is ladat, and it's also the word, ladat means also sex. Very interesting.
Yes.
And I think that it's a wonderful way of saying how my father's influence, here now I'm 91 and a half, and how my father's influence still comes through in terms of knowledge cannot be taken away from you.
Absolutely. By the way, one thing that this raises for me, because it's clear in the film and in your interviews, you speak many languages, right? You went from your native German to Hebrew, I guess French.
First to French.
French, Hebrew, English.
No, first Hebrew, then French, and then English.
Okay. Is one of those languages better than another in terms of really describing and getting into issues of sexuality?
I think for me, it has to be English, because that's where all my training comes from. So the Helen Singer Kaplan influence and all of the training and the doctorate, that really comes from English. So I can speak the other languages, but it's more difficult for me to give a lecture in the other language. I can write the other language easier than give a lecture, but so English is really the language.
And I also grew up speaking a few languages, and I've never been certain whether one language is better for, like, for example, ironic cursing. That would probably be Yiddish, which I don't speak, but I've heard my father in my youth curse in Yiddish, and it seems so flavorful in ways that English could never match. But obviously in Hebrew you have found words that resonate because of double meanings.
Yes, because I did a book of sexuality in the Jewish tradition. That has a reason, because I believe that the reason that I could do what I did, speaking so openly, that in the Jewish tradition, sex has never been a sin. It always has been an obligation of a husband with a wife, Friday night. Whoever sits here, make believe it's Friday night tonight. Don't just pick up somebody, only with your significant other, and try to have a different position and call me tomorrow. I learned something new. So but that comes really easier for me now. But I think the reason I'm using the Jewish background is serious, that it was never a sin. That's why I did sexuality in the Jewish tradition with Jonathan Mark, an Orthodox Jewish writer from the Jewish Week.
And by the way, the books that you've written, it's one thing to appreciate how Dr. Ruth has been a public figure, a very verbal icon, radio, television, public appearances. You've written dozens of books.
I talk them. Pierre writes them.
Okay, so you've composed dozens of books. But that seems to be, and Sex for Dummies is now in 4th edition, right?
4th edition, very important for young people because of the loneliness, because of my worry about sexually transmitted diseases, because they go to bed so much easier and faster. And so, but I can do these books because I talk and Pierre puts it on the computer.
Well, in fact, I was lucky enough a week ago to attend something at the Museum of Jewish Heritage, which was celebrating Dr. Ruth as the special guest of honor. She was interviewed by Wolf Blitzer, far from what I look like these days.
Wait, you are doing very well.
Thank you.
And Wolf Blitzer had to run back to Washington.
Yeah, he came
by
in
train.
just to interview her and then dashed back to do his program. But I got your new book, Crocodile, You're Beautiful, Embracing Our Strengths and Ourselves, which you co-wrote with Dana Neusner and Pierre Lehoux. I mean, I'm looking at this book, I'm going, amazing that Dr. Ruth, who we associate with a very mature and non-judgmental and open view of sexuality, is writing books for children. So could you just tell us a little bit more about that?
I'm basically deep down still a kindergarten teacher. And don't forget, my grandmother said I should be a kindergarten teacher because I'm so short, I fit into those little chairs. So I'm deep down a kindergarten teacher, and I'm deep down a kibbutznik that doesn't comb her hair. Even you had to comb my hair today. So I think that going and doing children's books right now, like the book or the turtle, Leopold, the turtle has to take a risk and, in order to advance. Otherwise, it stays in one place. That's very important. I did that. I talked about orgasm when nobody else did. So all of these, the children's book, that it makes sense for me to go back into the roots of where I came from. But I don't regret that I didn't stay a kindergarten teacher.
The world would be so much less rich for it. I mean, there'd be a lot more happy children maybe, but the adults here, I think, are grateful. I did want to ask one other thing because I realized we haven't talked about this in a long time. Back in 2009, I remember there was this wonderful one-woman show off-Broadway called Becoming Dr. Ruth. In fact, I remember, Sandra, you went to see it with us.
Deborah Jorab.
Yes.
Guess what happened before you talk?
That's what I want to know.
Marc Saint-Germain, the writer, first I said, really? And then I talked to him, and he's a wonderful friend now. And when I went on radio, some people said I have to take speech lessons in order to lose my accent. I made $1 an hour when they told me that. Deborah Jorab had to take speech lessons to learn my accent. I love that idea. And it's still going around the country.
So it is, that's what I wanted to know.
Yes.
So you are the this is rare, by the way, that a 91-year-old living icon is the subject of a new documentary and still the subject of a stage play that is traveling around?
It's not Deborah Jorab, she went on to some other things, but it's other community theaters around the country that from time to time still do it, which is nice. Interestingly, it's not mentioned in the movie.
Yeah, I was aware of that.
Interestingly, and I was aware of that only when I saw the movie. And then it was much too late. But Marc Saint-Germain and I are good friends, so he explained to me that they did not want to confuse the theater with a documentary. So he's not bitter about that. And Deborah Jorapp was at my birthday party where you were, and she even cried. I was angry at that. What's she crying at my 90th birthday party? They explained to me she has to cry for emotions. So, okay.
You know, but there are so many people who have not had the benefit of the wonderful parents I've had, and some of the others in the audience are probably, you know, aware of theirs. There are a lot of people who have grown up deep down wishing that they could have had someone like you, someone who would have been positive, nurturing. And by the way, this is even separate from this question of Holocaust survivors and second generation. There are, I mean, as a so-called 2G, you know, second generation member, I've often been asked, how in the world did you grow up so optimistic? You know, you seem to be so upbeat. Didn't your parents' experiences weigh heavily on you, either consciously or unconsciously? And I try somehow to say you can't generalize about survivors, about orphans of the Holocaust, about their children. There have been lucky people like me and you who had loving parents early on,
right.
And there have been less lucky people
right.
who didn't have the benefit of that. And in a way, if people cry, it may sometimes be because they're amazed that you exist and wish that they could have had you in their lives for a long time.
Very interesting, very interesting what you say, Annette, because that's why when I tell in the film that Fräulein Riesenfeld said that our parents didn't love us, that goes around with us. I've asked the others too. I will never forget that. How can somebody say, instead of saying they're sacrificed to send their only child to safety, to say they didn't love us, or they didn't love me, that's why they sent away. They did terrible things because they were not skilled psychologists. They were refugees themselves. Today I can explain it. As a child I could not explain it, but I checked with the others, like with Walter and Marga, with others. I hope that I didn't make that up, that it's only my imagination. No, the same sentence went with them throughout their lives also. Very interesting. That's why it's so important to talk about education and about what we have to do in order to raise good, healthy children. And that's why I make that point that none of us fell by the wayside. Not only that, you want to hear one more new thing?
Sure.
Guess what?
Sure.
In May, you have to be there. In May, I'm getting an honorary doctorate at Ben Gurion University.
Wow.
And Mark and you have to come. I have a few in this country. That's the first one in Israel. And while I was wounded and had that nice affair with the nurse, as you saw, which I do remember, never in my wildest dreams would I believe that I'm getting an honorary doctorate at Ben Gurion University. And I tell you what I'm doing. They did not ask me for anything. But in typical Ruth Westheimer fashion, I will waltz in with enough money that I'm going to raise right here, but not tonight, for a scholarship in psychology at Ben Gurion University.
Wow, that's fantastic.
Whoever gives me some money, good sex for the rest of your life.
Well, I remember about a year ago, it was one of the Israeli publications, I don't know if it was Haaretz or another, they did an article, the 10 greatest women Israel has produced. And I noticed that it was a very varied list because there was Gal Gadot, who played Wonder Woman, and there was Dr. Ruth. And, you know, obviously in Israel, you also have a special cachet, despite the fact that you were there for a limited period of time.
Because I went every year to work for Planned Parenthood in New York City. In Israel. I went with a little car all over the country to teach what I learned here. And so I'm delighted with that. And my parents would, I don't know, they wouldn't even believe it, that will happen to that little Carola that she's now getting an honorary doctorate and that she waltzes in with enough money for scholarship in psychology.
They would say, you do us proud, we raised you well. As you know, my mother was a professor, and she wrote her doctoral dissertation about this wonderful French philosopher, Montaigne. And I recently came across Montaigne's quote, "The shorter my possession of life, the deeper and fuller I must make it," unquote. And you seem to be a living embodiment of this, that as you come into your 90s now, you aren't slowing down, you're not retiring. You always say, I rewire instead. But I have to ask you this, because we've never really talked about it. Tell us, how can we somehow match your energy, drive, recall? What do you eat? How much do you sleep? Do you exercise? I mean, I want to know some of these things.
Okay.
I suspect some of my younger friends would want to know this too.
All right, the first thing I do, and I think that's the most important, and the Jerusalem Post reported it in a headline, that I said, which is true, that I take young men to hold on to rather than canes. So that's the whole story.
I don't think that's the whole story, but it's kind of compelling.
But I'm very fortunate. I'm fortunate I live in the same apartment. I'm fortunate that
How much do you sleep?
I do sleep. I don't let you or anybody call me before 10 a.m. I go to sleep at about midnight.
Okay.
I don't let anybody call. I have no restrictions with food or anything like that.
Do you exercise at all?
My mouth, from morning to night. I talk I must be also talking in my sleep. I think that's the only exercise I do. I do take from time to time a massage.
Okay.
2 hours by a Chinese massage guy who I cannot talk to because he doesn't speak English, I don't speak Chinese. So, and also I haven't taken the subway in a long time. Let's face it, there's a car waiting for me. Thank you to Hulu. All of you say, thank you, Hulu, I got a car. So, and I'm fortunate that I'm healthy.
But it seems to me that we've got to learn something of how to stay healthy like you, because I don't know, for example, I go crazy when I have to take transatlantic flights. I get dizzy, I get headaches. I mean, you fly everywhere all the time. You don't even have to take special medication or anything. You just... No jet lag?
No, I sleep on the plane before it goes up in the air, and then they have to wake me when it comes down.
You are lucky.
I'm lucky.
Yeah, there's no question about that. We're going to take a few questions from the audience, but I do want to mention, because this is award season, it was a year ago that a documentary about another Ruth, RBG, which was a very fine portrait, did get an Oscar nomination, and I can't help but hope that this year there will be another Oscar contender focused on a Ruth that will be in that category. And we're certainly going to be watching for the nominations with a great deal of anticipation where I come from. But we're going to raise the lights and take at least a few. We have time for a few questions from you. After all, the film is called Ask Dr. Ruth. So this is an opportunity.
You know that Ruth Bader Ginsburg said that what happened to her could only have happened in the United States. I say what has happened to me with the radio could only have happened in New York, because New Yorkers are very generous with people with different accents.
True.
That's
still true. There's a person on the aisle and then one down here. And I'll repeat.
Loved the movie, it was amazing. New York is notoriously a bad place for dating. Any advice for people?
New York is notoriously a bad place for dating. Any advice for us?
Read the book Sex for Dummies. And careful not to go to bed the first date. And I don't think that New York...
Do you have any strong feelings, though, about online dating sites? Is that...
If you are intelligent, not if you meet somebody in a dark corner someplace, if you meet at a hotel lobby, if you meet at a place that is public, if you meet at a restaurant, And if you meet somebody and you right away know that that's not for you, develop a headache and go home. So I don't have any magic thing, but I don't agree that New York is a bad place. I think, and I'm actually for matchmakers. If there are, if they don't promise the moon, and if they really have developed a cadre of prospective people, I'm all for it.
How does one find the matchmakers? I mean, it's a new thing for what I'm hearing.
No, I tell you something, the Orthodox Jews know how to do that.
Of course.
So we have to learn something from them, because they certainly, when the girl is a certain age and when the guy is a certain age, they certainly look around who fits into that cadre of true Orthodox, and they try to make matches. They're very concerned about it, and I'm all for it.
I mean, it's like the opposite poles of the spectrum between Tinder and Orthodox matchmaking. There's got to be something in between. There was a question here. Yes.
Hi. I really admire how, despite your small size, you're able to command quite a presence. I was wondering if you have any tips for people who also might be, as you say, diminutive, to also be taken seriously.
Yeah, I admire how, despite your small size, you are a commanding presence. Do you have any advice for others of us who are diminutive in terms of...
I tell you that in the very beginning of the radio, I did practice a little bit in front of a mirror, because those words did not roll out of my mouth so easily, like erection and lubrication and all of those words that I use from morning till night. I did practice a little bit by saying, let me sit in front of a mirror and practice a little bit.
So in other words, gaining a bit of self-confidence by looking into a mirror maybe even helped you to sit taller or stand taller or feel more self-possessed.
Right. And listening to the words that otherwise are like taboo, not to be spoken. And again, I have to say, being so Jewish, where sex has always been an obligation and not a sin, that helped me a great deal, coming from that background.
And I think also, I mean, because I'm trying to apply your question more directly, you seem to be very much your own person, comfortable in your skin. Like you never dressed up in any of those programs as a glamour puss. You may have had styled hair and some makeup, but you've always struck me as somebody who said, this is my body, I'm gonna just make the best of it, and without sort of embarrassment, presenting yourself.
Interesting that you say that, because I can see when I see the film, especially when I see Margas telling me, why didn't I go to a hairdresser, that I'm basically a kibbutznik at heart, that I'm still like I was when I was 17 and went to then Palestine, so that Jews should have a country of their own. So there's still something of that in me, which I guess I'm lucky that I have that.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then, you know, from that, you've gotten that sense of, I am who I am, and not trying to change too much of yourself for what seems to be the public consumption model.
High heels never worked for me. I might have tried when I was much younger in order to be a little bit taller. It never worked because I couldn't walk fast enough. So that's the reason for that.
Why have I switched? Those of the real pieces, diehards who've been with me for like 30 years may recall, oh, I used to have those stilettos big time. And then I got to a point where it was not only painful, but indeed it slowed me down.
Right.
So now, you know, I've got wedges, but I can run. And this is a very, very good thing in Manhattan these days, especially. We have time for one more question, yes?
I just wondered whether you ever think of yourself as Carola.
Do you ever think of yourself as Carola?
No. But I never forget that I was Carola. So there's a difference. I don't think of myself as that little girl that was put on a train But I'm very aware that if I had not been placed on the train, I would not be alive. But I never think back of that I would want to be called Carola. But there are friends of mine, now the second and third generation in Switzerland, for example, and in Israel, who still call me Carola. I call myself, when I talk about myself, Dr. Ruth Westheimer. But they still call me, it's now the third generation, because their grandmother was in the children's home with me. So even she's not alive anymore, they still call me Carola. So, but I don't think of myself as Carola.
Take one more down here.
How's your relationship with Alexa going?
How is your relationship with Alexa going?
I tell you, when I go home tonight, and then you have to get one question from a man.
Oh.
We didn't
Well, that's
get
true,
one
they
from a
do,
man.
female.
But I have to tell you, when I go home, I have to find her. I don't know where she is. She's someplace buried in my living room. But she's there. I know she's there.
But you know, you're pointing to something. Mark and I were just, during our third viewing, saying, what a great way to begin the film. Because it's like the introduction to you is coming partly from your introduction to the new technology that is a step away or above radio, television, internet. It does work perfectly. All right, you want one question from a man?
Yes.
Is there a man with a hand up? Oh, I don't think there. Oh, yes, there is. Okay, sorry.
Thank you, sir.
Dr. Ruth, you'll be 92 next year. Now,
Yes,
when is your birthday?
June 4th. Are you going to get me a gift?
I think I will.
Good.
Next year on June 4th, maybe this place can rename itself 92RW.
Maybe this place can rename itself 92YRW. I'm not sure that anything like that is possibly in the works, but I must say that I've been lucky enough to attend the 91st birthday and the 90th, which was one big blowout event. And for those of us who know you personally as well as professionally, you are and you remain this shining light of common sense wisdom, generosity. You're such a mensch that you know, one can only be grateful that you ended up in New York, and specifically tonight that you chose to share a little time with us.
Wait.
Thank you. Wait.
Give him my address for the gift.
Care of 92Y for the time being. Thank you all,
Thank you.
thank you for joining
Thank
us,
you,
my
Annette.
dear Ruth.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Annette, you're just wonderful.